Have you ever been completely underestimated? I'm talking about that moment when someone looks right through you, dismisses everything you've built, everything you know, and you just stand there, watching them dig their own grave without even realizing it. That's exactly what happened when Nathan Parker walked into Summit Solutions with his designer suit and his Harvard MBA, ready to optimize our operations. Without realizing, he was about to fire the woman whose name was on half the company documents. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The rain tapped against the windows of our Denver office as I stirred my morning tea, watching steam rise from the cup. Summit Solutions had grown from a cramped basement office to occupying 3 floors of one of the most sustainable buildings in Colorado. I'd poured 8 years of my life into developing solar technology that was now powering communities across the Southwest. The ceramic mug warmed my hands as I savored this quiet moment before the day began. That's when Nathan Parker strode through the door of the break room. I'd heard about our new operations director, of course. Richard, my business partner, had hired him during my 2-week trip to our Arizona installation site. "We need fresh perspectives," Richard had explained over the phone. "Someone to streamline things while we expand." I'd reluctantly agreed to meet with candidates when I returned, but apparently, Richard had moved forward without me. Nathan didn't look at me as he entered. Not really. His eyes swept across the room in that calculated way people do when they're checking for someone important. Finding only me, a woman in simple black slacks and a blue blouse, no designer labels or power accessories, his gaze moved on, dismissing me entirely. "You're Emma, right? From project development?" His voice carried that particular tone of someone who believes they're being generous by remembering your name. I set my mug down carefully. "Emma Rodriguez, yes." "Great. I need you in my office in 10 minutes. Bring your department files and project timelines." He didn't wait for a response, already typing something into his phone as he walked out. I stood there, tea forgotten. Project development? I'd founded the company. I'd developed the patented solar cell technology that made our systems 40% more efficient than anything else on the market. I'd secured our first major contract when we were still working out of Richard's garage. But to Nathan Parker, I was just another middle manager to be summoned. 10 minutes later, I knocked on the door of what had been our conference room. Nathan had already claimed it as his office, the large table now positioned like a barrier between him and whoever sat across from him. The walls, previously covered with our project maps and community impact photos, were now bare. "Come in, sit down," he said without looking up from his laptop. I placed my tablet on the table and waited. When he finally acknowledged me, it was with the practiced smile of someone who's attended too many leadership seminars. "Emma, thank you for coming in. I've been reviewing our organizational structure, and I've identified several redundancies we need to address." Redundancies. The corporate euphemism sent a chill down my spine. As you know, Summit is at a critical growth stage, and we need to optimize our resource allocation. Your department is currently consuming a significant portion of our operational budget, and the ROI metrics aren't aligning with our new strategic direction. I blinked slowly. I wasn't aware we had a new strategic direction. His smile tightened. "The board, Mr. Grant specifically, has tasked me with streamlining operations to prepare for our Series C funding round. We're pivoting toward larger commercial applications and scaling back our community-based initiatives." The board. Richard. My partner, my friend, who'd called our community projects the heart of Summit just last month. Something wasn't adding up. "I'd like to see that directive," I said calmly, "since it affects my projects directly." Nathan's eyebrow twitched, the first crack in his polished veneer. "That won't be necessary. The decision has been made." He slid a folder across the table. "We're terminating your position, effective immediately. Your team will be restructured under operations. This package includes 2 months severance and an NDA, which I'll need you to sign before you leave today." The fluorescent lights suddenly seemed too bright, too harsh. I stared at the folder but didn't touch it. "Did Richard approve this?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. Nathan's laugh caught me off guard. Short, sharp, almost incredulous. "Mr. Grant hired me to make these decisions so he wouldn't have to. He's focusing on the big picture now." He checked his watch. "HR has prepared your exit paperwork. They're expecting you in 15 minutes. When I didn't move, his expression hardened. "Look, Emma, I understand this is difficult. But frankly, your community projects are vanity initiatives that look good in press releases but drain our resources. Summit needs to grow up if it wants to compete with the big players." Grow up. As if the solar systems powering 3 rural hospitals were childish indulgences. As if the reduced-cost installations that had brought electricity to over 2,000 low-income homes were just for show. I should have been angry. Maybe part of me was. But mostly, I felt a strange, detached fascination, like watching someone confidently sail toward a waterfall without noticing the roaring ahead. "I see," I said finally, leaving the folder untouched. "And the Westridge contract? The expansion? Project in Pueblo? The new cell prototype?" He waved a dismissive hand. "All being reassigned. Your team will manage the transitions." His phone buzzed. He glanced at it, then back at me with growing impatience. "If there's nothing else?" I stood up slowly, smoothing my slacks. "Just one thing, Nathan." I maintained eye contact as I reached for my bag. "You might want to look at the company registration documents before my exit paperwork is finalized." His brow furrowed. "What's that supposed to mean?" I offered him a small, calm smile. "It means good luck, Nathan. I think you're going to need it." As I walked out, leaving the severance package untouched on his table, I heard him mutter something about dramatic exits. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. The wheels were already in motion, and Nathan Parker had just made the biggest mistake of his professional career. The office was unusually quiet as I walked to my desk. News travels fast in open floor plans. Curious eyes followed me, quickly darting away when I looked up. I didn't blame them. Most of these people had mortgages, student loans, families depending on their paychecks. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. They couldn't risk being associated with the woman who'd just been axed. Marcus Williams, our lead engineer and one of the first employees we'd hired, stood by the water cooler. Unlike the others, he met my gaze directly, his face a mask of controlled fury. "Tell me that wasn't what it looked like," he said quietly when I approached. "It was exactly what it looked like," I replied, keeping my voice low. "Mr. Parker has determined that I'm a redundancy." Marcus's water cup crumpled in his hand. "This is insane. Does he even know who you—" "Apparently not." I cut him off with a small shake of my head. "And Richard hasn't been answering my calls for 2 days." The concern in Marcus's eyes deepened. "Something's not right. Richard wouldn't—" "I know." I glanced toward the glass-walled conference room where Nathan was now on the phone, gesturing emphatically. "But right now, I need you to do something for me." "Anything," Marcus said without hesitation. "Act normal. Keep the Pueblo prototype. Development moving. And document everything that happens in the next few days. Every meeting, every decision, every email." He studied my face. "You're not just walking away." I thought about the company registration documents locked in Richard's office safe, about the patent certificates with my name on them, about the operating agreement Richard and I had signed on his kitchen table 8 years ago, when Summit was just a dream and a dangerous amount of student loan debt. "No," I said quietly. "I'm not." By the time I reached my apartment in downtown Denver, the shock had worn off, leaving something sharper in its place. I dropped my bag on the kitchen counter and moved to the wall of windows overlooking the city. Rain still fell, blurring the lights into watercolor smears against the darkening sky. I pulled out my phone and tried Richard again. Straight to voicemail, unusual for a man who treated his phone like an extra limb. My next call was to Sophia Lee, our legal counsel since the early days. "Emma," she answered on the second ring. "I was just about to call you. So you've heard?" "I've heard something," she said carefully. Nathan Parker sent an email to legal about preparing exit documents for a senior project manager. He didn't mention names. I closed my eyes briefly. "He fired me, Sophia, about an hour ago, called my work vanity projects, and said Richard authorized him to restructure." The silence on the other end spoke volumes. "Sophia, what aren't you telling me?" She sighed. "Richard's been offline for 3 days. He canceled our regular compliance meeting and sent an email saying he was handling something personal. Then this morning, Nathan called an executive briefing that I wasn't invited to." The unease that had been building since Nathan summoned me crystallized into something concrete. "Have you seen any board resolutions? Any amendments to the operating agreement?" "Nothing's crossed my desk," she said. "But Emma, if Richard gave Parker hiring and firing authority..." "Richard and I are equal partners," I cut in. 50-50. He can't make those decisions unilaterally, and you know it. Another pause. "The partnership agreement is clear," she agreed. "But if Parker doesn't know, he's about to find out." I watched a bolt of lightning flash across the sky. "I need you to do something for me. Pull together all the founding documents, the partnership agreement, the patent assignments. And Sophia, don't tell Parker you're doing it. You're not planning anything rash, are you?" The concern in her voice was genuine. "No," I said, surprising myself with how calm I felt. "I'm planning something very, very deliberate." After we hung up, I moved to my home office and unlocked the bottom drawer of my desk. Inside was a leather portfolio Richard had given me on our first anniversary as business partners. "For when we need to remember why we started," he'd said. I opened it now, running my fingers over the business plan we'd written together, the newspaper clipping from our first installation, the photo of us standing in front of an empty warehouse that would become our first real workshop. Richard's arm was around my shoulders, both of us grinning like we'd just won the lottery instead of signing a terrifying lease. Something was wrong. The Richard I knew wouldn't have hired someone like Nathan Parker, wouldn't have abandoned our community, projects, and he certainly wouldn't have let anyone push me out of the company we'd built together. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Parker just called emergency leadership meeting. Said you've moved on to pursue other opportunities. What's happening? I stared at the message, a cold certainty settling over me. Whatever game was being played, it was moving faster than I'd anticipated. "Keep watching," I texted back. And Marcus? Save everything. The next morning brought relentless sunshine, as if the weather itself was mocking yesterday's darkness. I dressed with particular care. A charcoal suit I reserved for investor meetings, silver earrings that had been a gift from my grandmother, hair pulled back in a sleek ponytail. Armor, in its own way. I didn't go to the Summit building. Instead, I drove to a small cafe 3 blocks away, one with a clear view of the office entrance. At 8:15, I watched Nathan stride through the front doors, coffee in hand, posture radiating confidence. By 8:30, my phone was buzzing constantly. "Parker's reassigning your entire project list, moving half the team to commercial." "Marcus, did you really quit? People are saying you walked out." "Jen from accounting. Emma, call me. Parker's telling everyone you accepted a competitor's offer. Something's not right." "David from the engineering." Team, I answered none of them. Instead, I waited, nursing my coffee until it grew cold. At 9:17, my patience was rewarded with a call from a number I didn't recognize. "Emma Rodriguez," I answered. "Ms. Rodriguez." The voice was female, professional, unfamiliar. "This is Abigail Chen from First Western Bank. I'm calling about some unusual activity on the Summit Solutions accounts." My grip tightened on the phone. "What kind of unusual activity?" "There's been a request to remove you as a signatory on all company accounts. The paperwork submitted indicates you're no longer affiliated with the company." The pieces were falling into place now, a picture emerging that made my stomach tighten. "When was this request submitted?" "Yesterday afternoon," she replied. "Normally we would process it routinely, but given the size of the accounts and your status as co-founder, our compliance department flagged it for review. Thank God for cautious bankers." "The request is fraudulent," I said firmly. "I am still a 50% owner of Summit Solutions. Have you attempted to reach Richard Grant?" "Mr. Grant's assistant informed us he's unavailable until next week." "Assistant?" Richard didn't have an assistant. He'd always refused to hire one, claiming he didn't want to hide behind gatekeepers. "Ms. Chen, I need you to freeze those accounts immediately," I said, rising from my table. "I believe there may be an attempt at financial impropriety. I'll be at your branch with documentation within the hour." By 10:30, I was sitting in a glass-walled office at First Western, surrounded by copies of Summit's founding documents. Sophia had met me there, bringing the partnership agreement that explicitly required both Richard's and my signature for any major financial changes. Abigail Chen, a razor-sharp woman in her 50s, reviewed everything with methodical precision. "This is concerning," she said finally, "particularly given the second request we received this morning." Sophia and I exchanged glances. "What second request?" Sophia asked. Abigail slid a document across the desk. "A wire transfer authorization for $7 million to a holding company called New Dawn Ventures, submitted with Mr. Grant's electronic signature, but without yours, Ms. Rodriguez." My blood ran cold. Our latest investment round had brought in $3 million. Nearly all of it was about to disappear. "That's not possible," I said, scanning the document. "All major transfers require dual authorization. And what is New Dawn Ventures? We don't have any partners or suppliers by that name." Abigail's expression was grim. "According to the documentation filed, it's a subsidiary established 3 weeks ago for your expansion into Texas." "We had no expansion plans for Texas." "This is fraud," Sophia said flatly. "We need to contact the FBI." "First, we need to secure the company," I countered, my mind racing. "Abigail, can you freeze all Summit accounts immediately? And I need documentation of every transaction, transfer, and access attempt for the past month." As Abigail made the necessary calls, I turned to Sophia. "How quickly can you get an emergency injunction? We need to bar Nathan Parker from making any further decisions on behalf of Summit." Sophia was already pulling out her laptop. "If we file electronically, we might get before a judge this afternoon." "But Emma, this goes beyond Nathan Parker. Someone set this up weeks ago before he even arrived." The realization hit me like a physical blow. "Richard," I whispered. "We need to find Richard." My phone rang. Marcus again. This time I answered. "Emma," he sounded breathless, urgent. "You need to get back here. Parker's clearing out your office, and there's something else. I found something on the server. Financial records, new company registrations." "Emma, I think Richard's in trouble." Parker was still in his new office when I walked through the Summit doors 30 minutes. Later, his face, when he saw me crossing the open workspace, performed a fascinating journey from confusion to irritation to forced affability. "Emma," he called, loud enough for nearby staff to hear. "I didn't expect to see you back. Did you forget something?" I didn't slow my stride. My company, apparently. A ripple went through the office, heads turning, conversations pausing. Parker's plastic smile faltered for just a moment before he recovered, moving quickly to intercept me before I could reach his office. "Let's talk privately," he suggested, his voice dropping to a warning murmur. "By all means," I replied, maintaining my volume. "We can start with why you're attempting to wire company funds to a shell corporation." The color drained from his face. Around us, the office had gone completely silent. "I don't know what you think you're doing," he hissed, "but you're making a serious mistake." "The mistake," I said clearly, "was assuming I wouldn't fight for what's mine." From the corner of my eye, I saw Sophia enter the office, accompanied by 2 uniformed police officers and a woman in a dark suit who screamed "federal agent" without needing to announce it. Parker saw them too. Something desperate flickered in his eyes. "This is a misunderstanding," he said quickly. "Richard Grant gave me full authority." "Richard Grant," I cut in, "has been unreachable for 3 days. His car is still in the company parking garage, his phone is going straight to voicemail, and someone is attempting to drain the company accounts using his electronic signature. So before you say another word, Nathan, I suggest you think very carefully about your next move." The federal agent approached us, her gaze coolly assessing. "Mr. Parker? I'm Special Agent Diaz with the FBI. We need to ask you some questions about New Dawn Ventures and your relationship with Victor Mercer." I didn't recognize the second name, but Parker's reaction told me everything I needed to know. His face went slack, eyes darting toward the exit. "Victor Mercer is a business associate," he stammered. "Any transactions were approved by Mr. Grant?" Agent Diaz finished for him. "That's going to be difficult to prove, since we've just found Mr. Grant's vehicle abandoned at a rest stop outside Boulder. His wallet and phone were inside." The floor seemed to tilt beneath me. "Richard. Is he—" I couldn't finish the sentence. "We don't know yet," she said, her tone softening slightly. "But given the financial maneuvers we're seeing, we have reason to believe he may have been coerced." As the officers led a shell-shocked Parker toward the exit, I remained standing in the center of the office, acutely aware of every pair of eyes on me. These people had watched me get fired yesterday, had heard rumors about my departure, had seen the company they worked for nearly stolen out from under them, and me. I took a deep breath and turned to face them. "I know you all have questions," I said, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. "So do I. What I can tell you right now is that Summit Solutions remains under my leadership as co-founder and 50% owner. All projects will continue as planned. And I promise you this, I will find out what happened to Richard, and I will make sure nothing like this ever threatens our company again." Marcus stepped forward from the crowd. "What can we do to help?" I looked at the faces around me, concerned, confused, but present. Ready. "First," I said, "we secure everything, every document, every file, every project. Then we do what Summit has always done best. We adapt, we overcome, and we move forward. Together." As the room broke into determined motion, my phone vibrated with a text. Unknown number. E, not what it looks like. Trust no one. 4672J. Her Richard was alive. And the reference to 4672J, our first project code, known only to the two of us, confirmed it was really him. I slipped the phone into my pocket, a strange calm settling over me. Nathan Parker had fired me without realizing I was co-owner of the company. But his mistake had revealed something far more dangerous lurking beneath Summit's surface. Now I had a company to protect and a partner to find. And unlike yesterday morning, this time I was prepared for battle. The coded text from Richard burned in my pocket as I watched the FBI agents set up a command center in our conference room. The message felt like a physical weight. Trust no one. 4672J. Those numbers, our first successful solar installation. The project that had convinced us both that Summit Solutions could actually work. It was a message only I would understand. I slipped away from the chaos of the main office floor, seeking a moment of quiet to think. Our server room, tucked away in the building's core, offered the sanctuary I needed. The constant hum of cooling fans and the blinking lights of network switches had always been oddly comforting to me. Technology was predictable in ways people weren't. As the door closed behind me, sealing out the noise, I leaned against the cool metal racks and closed my eyes. My company had nearly been stolen out from under me. Richard was missing, and now I needed to figure out who exactly I couldn't trust. I pulled out my personal laptop, not my company one that Nathan might have compromised, and connected directly to our backup server. Years ago, when Summit was still operating out of Richard's garage, we'd established a security protocol that had seemed paranoid at the time. Every critical document, every piece of intellectual property, every financial record was automatically backed up to an isolated system that required both our authentication to access. If someone had been tampering with our company, the evidence would be here. My fingers flew across the keyboard, entering the complex password sequence we'd established. Richard's half would have come from his private key, which he kept on a USB drive he wore around his neck, a quirk I'd teased him about countless times. But now I was grateful for his paranoia. After several minutes of searching, I found what I was looking for. Hidden in a folder structure that appeared to contain routine maintenance logs was a document created 3 weeks ago, right around the time Nathan Parker had entered our lives. The file was encrypted, but the file name made my heart race. Mercer Agreement Final. PDF, Victor Mercer. The name the FBI agent had mentioned, the one that made Nathan Parker look like he'd seen a ghost. I tried several decryption keys without success, then paused, thinking about Richard's message. 4672J wasn't just our first project code. It was also the address. 4672 Juniper Street, the location of our first installation. With nothing to lose, I tried it as a decryption key. The file opened instantly. What I found inside made my blood run cold. It was a carefully structured agreement between Victor Mercer, CEO of Helios Energy, our largest competitor, and a shell company called New Dawn Ventures. The terms outlined a systematic plan to acquire Summit's proprietary technology, client list, and talent pool through what essentially amounted to a hostile takeover disguised as a strategic investment. And there, on the last page, was Nathan Parker's signature. He wasn't just some new hire who had overstepped his authority. He was Mercer's plant, strategically placed to destabilize our company from within. But Richard's signature was missing. Whatever they had planned, he hadn't agreed to it. At least, not willingly. I scrolled back through the document, studying the details. The plan was meticulous. Use Parker to remove me from the company, isolate Richard from key decisions, then systematically drain Summit's resources into New Dawn Ventures, which would later be acquired by Helios for pennies on the dollar. Our technology, our patents, our years of work, all of it would belong to our biggest competitor. There you are. I nearly jumped out of my skin at the sound of Marcus's voice. He stood in the doorway, concern etched on his face. "Sorry," he said quickly. "Didn't mean to startle you. The FBI agents are asking for access to financial records, and no one can find the current password for the..." He stopped, noticing my expression. "What is it? What did you find?" I hesitated, Richard's warning echoing in my mind. Trust no one. But if I couldn't trust Marcus, who had been with us almost since the beginning, then who could I trust? "Close the door," I said quietly. As Marcus sat beside me, I turned the laptop so he could see the document. His face darkened as he read, jaw tightening with each paragraph. "This is industrial espionage," he said finally. "Corporate theft on a massive scale." "It's worse than that," I replied. Look at the timeline. This has been in motion for months, long before Nathan Parker showed up. Marcus's eyes widened as he reached the section detailing previous phases of the plan. They've had access to our internal communications since February. That's right after we announced the breakthrough on the new solar cell. I finished for him. The one that increased efficiency by 40% over industry standard. He ran a hand through his hair, the implications sinking in. So Parker firing you wasn't just arrogance, it was strategic. You're the only one who fully understands the technology. Without me, the patents and research are still valuable, but implementing them becomes much harder. I nodded. They wanted me gone before the merger so I couldn't raise objections or take the knowledge elsewhere. Marcus stood abruptly, pacing the narrow space between server racks. We need to tell the FBI. Not yet, I said, closing the laptop. We don't know how deep this goes or who else might be involved. Richard warned me to trust no one, and until I find him, I'm following that advice. You think there are more moles? Beyond Parker? I thought about the ease with which someone had accessed our systems, redirected our finances, created false documentation. It would be naive to think Parker was working alone. Then, what's our next move? Marcus asked. I slipped the laptop into my bag. First, we secure what's ours. I need you to contact every person on the development team, quietly, one by one. Tell them to lock down all research, back up their work to personal drives, and not to discuss project details with anyone new. And after that? I stood, a plan forming in my mind. After that, we're going to set a trap. The next hours passed in a blur of activity. While the FBI focused on tracking Nathan Parker's connections to Victor Mercer and the missing funds, I orchestrated a quieter, more targeted investigation. First, I needed to understand exactly how compromised our systems were. I enlisted Gia, our head of cybersecurity, swearing her to secrecy before explaining enough of the situation to get her help. Her expression grew grimmer with each test And they've been using a sophisticated keylogger, she explained, showing me lines of code I only partially understood. It's been capturing passwords, recording screen activity, monitoring emails, basically giving someone a complete window into our operations. Can you tell who installed it? I asked. She shook her head. It's linked to an IT maintenance protocol that was run 3 months ago. Everyone on the tech team would have had access, which meant the traitor could be anyone with admin privileges. The circle of trust was growing smaller by the minute. Can we use it? I asked, an idea taking shape. Feed it false information? A slow smile spread across Gia's face. Now you're thinking like a hacker. By mid-afternoon, our counter-operation was underway. While maintaining a convincing facade of cooperation with the FBI investigation, we quietly began feeding misinformation through our compromised channels. Emails discussing a fictional backup server containing all our proprietary research. Calendar invites for an emergency board meeting to discuss contingency options for the company's intellectual property. Just enough breadcrumbs to make someone nervous. Meanwhile, I had another problem to solve. Finding Richard. His cryptic message suggested he was alive but in trouble. If he had been coerced as the FBI suspected, his disappearance might not be random. It could be connected to whatever leverage Mercer and his people had over him. I retreated to my office, which Parker had thankfully not yet cleared out, and locked the door. Then I pulled out a second phone, one Richard and I had set up years ago when we were still paranoid startup founders afraid of corporate espionage. We'd barely used it in recent years, but we'd kept the account active just in case. I sent a simple message. R, it's E. I know about Mercer. FBI involved. Need location. Stay safe. For 20 minutes, I stared at the screen, willing it to light up with a response. Nothing came. Either Richard didn't have access to his emergency phone, or he couldn't risk replying. A gentle knock at my door broke my concentration. Sophia stood outside, her expression carefully neutral until I let her in and closed the door again. "The bank confirmed what we suspected," she said without preamble. "The transfer attempts to New Dawn started 2 weeks ago, all using Richard's electronic signature. All after hours, all from IP addresses that don't match his usual locations." "So, someone stole his credentials," I said. Sophia hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "Or he provided them under duress." "Emma, there's something else you should..." "No. I've been reviewing Richard's personal finances going back 6 months." My stomach tightened. "And?" "He's been in trouble. Serious trouble. Gambling debts, high-interest loans, a second mortgage on his house that the company wasn't aware of. He's been underwater financially since at least January." The revelation hit me like a physical blow. Richard, my partner, my friend, had been drowning financially and had never said a word. Had his desperation made him vulnerable to pressure from someone like Mercer? "Why wouldn't he come to me?" I murmured, more to myself than to Sophia. "Pride, maybe," she suggested gently. "Or shame. You know how Richard is about appearances." I did know. Richard, with his perfect suits and his country club membership, always projecting success and confidence even in our leanest years. How had I missed the signs that it had become a house of cards? "This doesn't mean he was complicit," I said firmly. "It means he was a target, vulnerable. If Mercer found out about his financial situation, it would make Richard the perfect pressure point," Sophia finished. "I agree, but it complicates things with the FBI. If they discover this, they'll assume he's part of the conspiracy." I nodded. "We need to find him first." My phone, my regular one, buzzed with a text from Marcus. Someone took the bait. "Access attempt on the fake backup server we mentioned. Tracing now." The trap was working. Someone besides Parker was still operating inside Summit, still trying to steal what wasn't theirs. Now we just needed to figure out who. I turned to Sophia. "I need you to do something that might bend some ethical guidelines. Can you access Richard's cell phone records without the FBI knowing?" Her expression told me she knew exactly what. "Lines we were crossing. I'll see what I can do." As Sophia left, my emergency phone finally buzzed. The message was brief. "Boulder Creek Lodge, Cabin 8. Tomorrow, 6 a.m. Come alone. Tell no one." Relief washed over me. Richard was alive, and tomorrow I would finally get some answers. But first, I had a mole to catch. The next few hours were a masterclass in corporate espionage detection. With Gia's help, we traced the unauthorized access attempts to an IP address within our building. Someone was still here, still hunting for our technology, even as the FBI combed through financial records just floors away. By using a clever combination of digital bait and building security cameras, we narrowed down the list of suspects. The access attempts originated from the executive floor during a 15-minute window when most people were in a company-wide briefing about the FBI investigation. Only 3 people had remained on that floor. Lisa from accounting, who'd been on a client call, Derek from legal, who was photocopying documents for the FBI, and James Chen, our recently promoted VP of Business Development. James, who had been pushing hard for us to explore a partnership with Helios Energy just months ago. James, who had unusually frequent industry networking events that often coincided with documented meetings between Nathan Parker and Victor Mercer. "We need to be sure," I told Marcus and Gia as we reviewed the evidence in the server room. "If we're wrong about this..." "We're not wrong," Gia said firmly, pointing to her screen. "Look at the access patterns. Whoever did this knew exactly where to look, which servers to target. This isn't some random phishing expedition. They knew our system architecture. And James was part of the IT restructuring team last year," Marcus added. He helped design the new network security protocols. The betrayal stung more than I wanted to admit. James had been with Summit for 4 years. I'd personally approved his promotion, impressed by his strategic vision and apparent commitment to our mission. "How do we handle this?" Marcus asked. "Go to the FBI?" I considered our options. The FBI was focused on the financial crimes, the attempted wire transfers, the fraudulent documents. They might eventually connect James to the broader conspiracy, but by then, the damage to our intellectual property could be done. No, I decided. We handle this ourselves. The plan came together quickly. James was still in the building, still performing his duties as if nothing had happened. He didn't know we'd traced the latest intrusion attempt to him. We had the element of surprise. I sent him a meeting request, urgent, private, regarding contingency plans for our proprietary technology in light of current events. The perfect bait for someone desperate to know if his scheme had been discovered. He accepted within minutes. The small conference room I'd chosen was deliberately away from the main activity, its glass walls covered with presentation paper for privacy. Marcus set up a hidden camera before leaving me alone to wait. James arrived looking perfectly composed in his tailored suit, not a hint of nerves showing on his face. That calm facade only confirmed my suspicions. Innocent people. In the midst of a corporate meltdown, don't look that unruffled. "Emma," he smiled, taking a seat across from me. "Good to see you back in charge. This situation with Parker is unbelievable." I studied him. This man who'd been secretly working to destroy everything we'd built. His expression was a masterpiece of concerned solidarity. "Unbelievable is one word for it," I agreed, keeping my tone neutral. "I've asked you here because we need to make some decisions about protecting our technology. As you know, the new solar cell design is our most valuable asset." His eyes flickered with interest, just briefly, but I caught it. "Absolutely," he nodded. "Have you considered moving the research off-site? I have some connections who could help secure—" "Actually," I interrupted, sliding a folder across the table, "I've already made arrangements." He opened the folder eagerly, then froze. Instead of confidential technology plans, he found printouts of his own digital footprints, the server access logs, timestamps matching his keycard entries, email exchanges with a private account we'd linked to Victor Mercer. The color drained from his face. There's been some mistake." "No mistake, James," I said quietly. "We know everything. Your connection to Mercer, your role in helping Parker infiltrate Summit. The only question now is whether you're going to make this easier on yourself by telling us where Richard is." His composure cracked entirely, panic replacing the smooth corporate veneer. "I don't know anything about Richard. Yes, I've been feeding information to Helios, but that was just business intelligence, corporate headhunting. I never signed up for kidnapping or whatever this has become." "Then what did you sign up for?" I pressed. "Because from where I'm sitting, you've committed corporate espionage, facilitated fraud, and potentially aided in a kidnapping." "Mercer promised me a position," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "Executive VP at Helios after the acquisition. All I had to do was provide information about Summit's operations, highlight vulnerabilities. Then Parker came in and everything escalated." He looked up, desperation in his eyes. "You have to believe me. I never thought it would go this far." "Where is Mercer now?" I demanded. "I don't know, I swear. We always meet at this restaurant in Boulder, the Pines. That's all I know." He was almost pleading now. "Look, Emma, I made a mistake, a terrible mistake. But I can help make this right. I know things about their operation, about what they're planning next." The door opened, and Agent Diaz stepped in, flanked by 2 other FBI agents. "James Chen," she said calmly, "we'd like you to come with us." His shoulders slumped in defeat. As the agents led him away, Diaz lingered behind. "That was dangerous, Ms. Rodriguez. You should have come to us first." I met her gaze steadily. "With all due respect, Agent Diaz, I needed answers you weren't looking for yet." "And did you get them?" "Some," I acknowledged, "but not all." After she left, Marcus reappeared, concern written across his face. "The Boulder Creek Lodge," he said quietly. I looked it up. It's isolated, minimal staff, cash payments accepted. Perfect place to hold someone without attracting attention. "Or perfect place for an ambush," I countered. "Richard said to come, alone. But if Mercer has leverage over him..." "You can't seriously be considering going by yourself?" Marcus interrupted. "After everything we've just discovered?" I thought about Richard's message, about the years of trust and partnership between us. Even with everything I'd learned about his financial troubles, I couldn't believe he would willingly betray Summit, betray me. "I'm not going alone," I assured Marcus, "but whoever comes with me needs to stay hidden. If Richard is being coerced, we can't risk spooking whoever's holding him." "The FBI move too slowly and with too much visibility," I cut in. "By the time they get a warrant and organize a proper approach, anything could happen." "No, this needs to be handled quietly." Marcus studied my face, then nodded slowly. "I know some people. Ex-military, absolute discretion. They can have a team ready by dawn." I raised an eyebrow. "Should I ask why you have these connections?" A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "Let's just say my resume has some gaps you never questioned." As night fell over Denver, I retreated to my apartment to prepare for whatever tomorrow would bring. The FBI had stationed agents outside Summit's offices and secured our servers, but they couldn't protect what they didn't know was at risk: Richard and the full extent of our technology. I packed a small bag, change of clothes, first aid kit, the emergency phone, and a USB drive containing enough evidence to destroy Victor Mercer if anything happened to me. As I moved around my apartment, the reality of what I was facing finally hit me. 24 hours ago, I'd been fired from my own company by a man who didn't realize who I really was. Now I was preparing for what might amount to a hostage negotiation. My regular phone rang. Sophia. "I've got something," she said without preamble. Richard's phone records show a series of calls from a burner phone that first contacted him around the time his financial problems began. The calls increased in frequency until last week when they stopped completely. "Blackmail," I said quietly. "Mercer found his vulnerability and exploited it." "That's my guess," Sophia agreed. "There's more. I spoke with Richard's ex-wife." "Caroline?" I interrupted, surprised. They'd divorced years ago before Summit was even founded and rarely spoke. "Yes." She mentioned that Richard had reached out to her about a month ago, asking if she still had some old files from his grad school days, specifically his thesis on solar energy conversion. I frowned, puzzled. His thesis? Why would he need that after all these years? "That's what struck me as odd," Sophia said. But then I remembered. Richard's thesis contained early versions of some of the technology that eventually became Summit's core patents. What if Mercer wasn't just after our current research, but trying to challenge the foundation of our intellectual property? The pieces suddenly clicked into place. If Mercer could prove that Summit's fundamental technology was developed before the company existed, he could potentially challenge our patent protections and claim the innovations were pre-existing. Intellectual property. "It's not just about stealing our future," I said slowly. "He's trying to steal our past, too." After Sophia hung up, I sat by my window, watching the city lights and turning over everything I'd learned. Tomorrow at dawn, I would face whatever was waiting at Boulder Creek Lodge. But I wouldn't go as the Emma Rodriguez who had been dismissed by Nathan Parker. I would go as the woman who had built Summit Solutions from nothing, who had overcome every obstacle the industry had thrown at her, who refused to let anyone, not Parker, not Mercer, not even Richard's demons, destroy what she had created. I would go as the co-owner, the inventor, the founder, and I would get my company back, every last piece of it. As the first hint of dawn colored the sky, I drove the winding mountain road toward Boulder Creek Lodge, Marcus and his associates, following at a discreet distance in unmarked vehicles. The lodge itself was exactly as described: rustic, isolated, the kind of place that appealed to people who wanted to disappear for a while. Cabin 8 sat at the edge of the property, partially obscured by pine trees. No other cars were visible, but that didn't mean we were alone. I parked my car in plain sight and took a deep breath, checking once more that the panic button on my phone was accessible. One press would bring Marcus and his team running. As I approached the cabin door, my heart pounded in my chest. For all my planning, all my careful preparation, I had no way of knowing what waited on the other side. But I had come too far to turn back now. I knocked 3 times, firmly. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the door opened, and I came face to face with Richard Grant, pale, unshaven, with dark circles under his eyes, but very much alive. "Emma," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You came alone?" I met his gaze steadily. Not exactly. He seemed to understand instantly, nodding almost imperceptibly before stepping back to let me enter. The cabin was Spartan but clean. One room with a small kitchenette, a bed, a table with 2 chairs. No signs of struggle, no indication he was being held against his will. But the tension in his body told me everything I needed to know. Richard wasn't here by choice. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, once the door was closed. "For all of it. I never thought. I didn't realize what Mercer was planning until it was too late." "Start from the beginning," I said, taking a seat at the table. "Tell me everything." And so he did. The story unfolded exactly as I had pieced together, but with details only Richard could provide. The gambling that had started as a distraction after his divorce from his second wife, the mounting debts, the increasingly desperate attempts to keep up appearances while falling further behind. Then Victor Mercer had entered the picture, charming, sympathetic, offering a solution. A loan to tide Richard over, no formal paperwork, just a gentleman's agreement between colleagues. Except the loan had come with strings that only became visible once Richard was hopelessly entangled. He knew everything about Summit. Richard explained, pacing the small cabin. Our finances, our research, our patent vulnerabilities. He made it clear that if I didn't cooperate, he would not only ruin me financially, but would take legal action that would destroy the company. I thought I could play along, find a way out, protect what we'd built. By hiring Nathan Parker? I couldn't keep the edge from my voice. Richard flinched. That was Mercer's condition for extending my deadline. I never anticipated Parker would try to fire you. That wasn't part of what I agreed to. And what exactly did you agree to? Richard? He couldn't meet my eyes. To a gradual restructuring that would make an eventual merger with Helios look attractive to our board. To sharing some, not all, of our technology. To positioning Summit for an acquisition that would save face for everyone. He finally looked up. But when Parker moved against you, when I realized what they were really after, you ran. I finished for him. I ran, he acknowledged, but not before I gathered evidence. Recordings of my meetings with Mercer, copies of the real agreements, versus what he presented to others, proof of how they planned to systematically dismantle Summit and steal our technology. He crossed to the bed, reached beneath the mattress, and pulled out a slim laptop. It's all here, enough to destroy Mercer legally, but he knows I have it, which is why... A phone rang, not mine, not Richard's emergency line, but a third phone on the kitchenette counter. Richard froze, his expression tight with fear. "That's him," he whispered. "He calls every 3 hours." If I don't answer, if I don't say exactly what he expects, his people will move in. I glanced out the window, scanning the tree line. His people are already here, aren't they? Watching the cabin. Richard nodded. At least 2 that I've spotted. They let me choose this place, stay here voluntarily, while the terms of my agreement with Mercer are finalized. But make no mistake, I'm not free to leave. The phone continued to ring. Answer it, I said firmly. Tell him exactly what he expects to hear. As Richard picked up the phone, I sent a quick text to Marcus. Armed watchers in the woods. Locate and neutralize. Richard cooperating. Richard's side of the conversation was brief, his responses carefully measured. Yes. No changes. No sign of anyone. Yes, I understand the consequences. When he hung up, his hands were shaking. He's coming, today, with the final paperwork that will effectively sign over controlling interest in Summit to his shell company. What time? I asked, already calculating. Noon. I smiled for the first time since entering the cabin. Perfect. Richard looked confused. Emma, you don't understand. This man is dangerous. He has people watching us right now, and if he suspects anything... Not anymore, I said, showing him the text I'd just received from Marcus. Area secured. 2 subjects detained. Lodge staff evacuated as precaution. Richard stared at the message, then back at me. You brought, what? A private security team? Let's just say I didn't walk in here without a backup plan. I stood up, suddenly energized by the momentum shifting in our favor. Now I need you to call Mercer back. Tell him you want to move the meeting up. Tell him your attorney insisted on reviewing the documents before you sign, and the only time she's available is 9 a.m. Understanding dawned in Richard's eyes. The FBI, he breathed. You've involved them. Not yet, I corrected him. But I will. The moment Mercer steps foot on this property with fraudulent documents and clear intent to commit corporate theft. For the first time since I'd entered the cabin, Richard smiled, a shadow of his old confident grin. You know, when I asked you to be my business partner 8 years ago, it was because you were the smartest engineer I'd ever met. I never imagined you'd turn out to be better at corporate warfare than I ever was. I had a good teacher, I replied, pulling out my phone to set the final stage of our plan into motion. Now let's finish what Mercer started, just not the way he intended. As I dialed Agent Diaz's number, watching the morning sun illuminate the Colorado mountains through the cabin window, I felt a profound sense of clarity. Summit Solutions had always been more than just a company to me. It was my life's work, my contribution to a better world, my legacy. And no one, not Nathan Parker, not Victor Mercer, not even a moment of weakness from my own business partner, would ever take that away from me. The woman who had been dismissed as non-essential just days ago was about to teach everyone exactly how essential she truly was. The sun had barely crested the mountains when Mercer's black Escalade pulled into the gravel parking area of Boulder Creek Lodge. He was early, a calculated move to catch us off guard. I watched from behind the thin curtains of Cabin 8 as he stepped out, followed by 2 men whose stiff postures and vigilant eyes marked them as security rather than business associates. One moved to scan the perimeter, while the other stayed close to Mercer. He's not alone, I murmured to Richard, who sat at the small table reviewing our strategy one final time. Richard's face tightened. He never is. Agent Diaz and her team were in position, concealed in cabins on either side of us, waiting for Mercer to explicitly incriminate himself. The plan was simple but precarious. Get Mercer to confirm his intentions regarding Summit, record his admission, and secure both Richard's safety and our company's future in one decisive move. I stepped away from the window as Mercer approached the cabin. Remember, I told Richard, he needs to admit what he's doing. All of it. The blackmail, the corporate espionage, the plan for our technology. Richard nodded, his jaw set with determination despite the fear in his eyes. I'll get him talking. He loves to gloat. The sharp knock on the door made us both flinch. Richard took a deep breath, squared his shoulders, and transformed before my eyes. Gone was the haggard, frightened man of the past hour. In his place stood the smooth, confident entrepreneur I'd known for years, a masterful performance for Mercer's benefit. I moved to the small bathroom, leaving the door cracked just enough to hear without being seen. We'd decided my presence would be our ace in the hole, a surprise to deploy only if absolutely necessary. Richard opened the door with a practiced smile. Victor, you're early. Time is money, Richard. Mercer's voice was smooth, cultured, dripping with the casual arrogance of someone accustomed to getting his way. And you've wasted enough of mine already. Footsteps entered the cabin, followed by the sound of papers being placed on the table. These are the final documents transferring majority interest in Summit Solutions to New Dawn Ventures. Sign them, and your debt to me is cleared. Just like that. Richard's tone was carefully calibrated, not challenging but seeking reassurance. And the other matter? Your gambling indiscretions remain our little secret. Your reputation stays intact. Everyone wins. A pause. Then Mercer added with a colder edge, except perhaps your partner. Ms. Rodriguez seems to have caused quite a stir after her departure. My fingers tightened around the edge of the bathroom door. The casual way he referenced my firing, like it was an amusing anecdote rather than an orchestrated destruction of my career, made my blood boil. Emma was unexpected. Collateral damage, Richard responded smoothly. Parker overstepped. Mercer chuckled. Parker did exactly what he was brought in to do: remove obstacles. Your partner's tendency to prioritize community projects over profit margins made her the perfect target. The board was already questioning her judgment. Parker just accelerated the inevitable. And once I sign these, Richard continued, what happens to Summit? To our technology? A rustle of clothing suggested Mercer had sat down. Summit Solutions ceases to exist in its current form. The shell will remain, enough to satisfy existing contracts and maintain appearances. The truly valuable assets, the patents, the research, the talent, those transfer to Helios through New Dawn. We implement your solar cell technology under our brand, scaled for commercial applications rather than those feel-good community projects Emma was so fond of. The market valuation triples within 18 months. And my role? Richard pressed. You get a comfortable consulting position, limited visibility, generous compensation, no real authority. A golden parachute for a man who made one too many poor decisions. The smirk was audible in Mercer's voice. Consider it my gift to an old friend. I had heard enough. The recording devices placed throughout the cabin had captured every damning word. But Richard was pushing further, ensuring we had everything we needed. And if I decide not to sign? There was a moment of silence, then the sound of a chair scraping back. When Mercer spoke again, the pleasant veneer had vanished. We've been through this, Richard. Your options are extraordinarily limited. Either sign these papers and walk away with your reputation and a comfortable future, or I release evidence of your gambling, your debts, your desperate attempts to cover them up using company resources. The board removes you, your precious company, collapses under the scandal, and you face potential criminal charges. A heavy pause. And that's not considering what might happen to Emma when she inevitably tries to save what's left. The threat hung in the air, explicit enough for our purposes. I pushed the bathroom door open and stepped out. What might happen to me, Victor? I asked calmly. Mercer's head snapped toward me, genuine shock replacing his usual composed expression. He recovered quickly, a cold smile spreading across his face as he assessed the new dynamic. Ms. Rodriguez, how unexpected. His eyes flicked from me to Richard, calculating rapidly. though perhaps not entirely surprising. Richard always did lack the spine to handle matters on his own. Richard stood, moving to stand beside me in a small but significant show of solidarity. She knows everything, Victor. The blackmail, the corporate theft, Parker's role, all of it. Mercer's smile didn't waver, but his eyes hardened to flint. Allegations without proof, the desperate flailing of a failed executive and her financially compromised partner. He gestured toward the papers on the table. The documents awaiting signature tell a different story, one of a legitimate business transaction between consenting parties. Is that what you call coercion and blackmail now? A legitimate business transaction? I kept my voice steady, letting the recording devices capture every word. He studied me with the detached interest of someone observing an insect. What I call it is irrelevant. What matters is what can be proven. And right now, all evidence suggests Summit is a struggling company making a strategic decision to accept acquisition. Nothing more. Except for these, I said, pulling out my phone and opening the file containing the evidence I'd spent the night compiling. Bank records showing your payments to Parker. Communications outlining your strategy to infiltrate Summit. Internal. Helios documents identifying our technology as acquisition targets months before you approached Richard. For the first time, uncertainty flickered in Mercer's eyes. It vanished almost immediately, replaced by calculated menace. An impressive effort, he conceded, but ultimately futile. Those documents will never see the inside of a courtroom. My legal team would bury you in motions until Summit runs out of money to fight, which, based on your current cash flow, would be approximately 3 months from now. He straightened his already impeccable suit jacket. This isn't my first corporate acquisition, Ms. Rodriguez. I've broken stronger companies than yours, and I've faced more formidable opponents than a scientist playing businesswoman. That was it, the final piece of evidence we needed. The explicit acknowledgement that this wasn't a legitimate acquisition but a hostile takeover designed to break us. You're right about one thing, Victor, I said, allowing a small smile. This isn't your first corporate acquisition, but it will definitely be your last. I raised my voice slightly. Agent Diaz, I believe we have what we need. The cabin door opened and Agent Diaz stepped in, followed by 2 other FBI agents. The cold satisfaction on Mercer's face gave way to stunned realization as he recognized the federal insignia. Victor Mercer, Agent Diaz began. You're under arrest for wire fraud, blackmail, corporate espionage, and conspiracy to commit securities fraud. You have the right to remain silent. As Mercer was escorted from the cabin in handcuffs, his mask of superiority finally crumbled, revealing the desperate fury beneath. He twisted toward Richard and me, his composure gone. This changes nothing, he spat. You think Summit can survive without me? Parker's already gutted your leadership. The market will destroy you both. Agent Diaz firmly guided him toward the waiting FBI vehicle, cutting off his tirade. I stood in the doorway of the cabin, watching until the Escalade and the FBI cars disappeared down the winding mountain road. Richard joined me, the morning sunlight highlighting the exhaustion etched into his face. It's really over? That part is, I replied, already mentally shifting to the challenges ahead. But putting Mercer and Parker behind bars doesn't automatically fix Summit. He nodded, understanding the unspoken weight of what awaited us back in Denver. A wounded company, a destabilized leadership team, employees afraid for their jobs, and projects in disarray. Emma, he began, hesitation in his voice. I held up a hand, not yet ready for the apology I knew was coming. Later. Right now, we have a company to save. The drive back to Denver was largely silent, both of us processing the seismic shifts of the past 48 hours. I had gone from fired employee to company savior in less time than it typically took to approve a routine budget request. Richard had gone from missing person to cooperating witness. And Summit Solutions, our shared vision, our life's work, had narrowly escaped corporate execution. By the time we reached the Summit building, news of Mercer's arrest had already spread. Employees clustered in small groups throughout the open office space, conversations halting abruptly as Richard and I stepped off the elevator together. Sophia met us immediately, professionalism barely containing her relief at seeing Richard safe. "The FBI has been briefing the executive team," she informed us quietly. "They've seized Parker's files and locked down all financial channels. The board is assembling for an emergency session in 30 minutes. "Thank you," I said, then turned to address the watching employees. There was no point in pretending this was business as usual. They deserved transparency after everything that had happened. "I know you all have questions," I began, raising my voice to carry across the floor. "The past 2 days have been unprecedented for Summit Solutions. What you may have heard is true. There was an orchestrated attempt to take over our company through illegal means. Nathan Parker was placed here specifically to destabilize our operations and create conditions for acquisition." Murmurs rippled through the gathered staff. I continued, maintaining the steady, measured tone I'd always used in crisis situations. "That attempt has failed. The FBI has arrested Victor Mercer and Nathan Parker. Our company assets are secure, and our operations will continue. This afternoon, Richard and I will meet with the board to outline our recovery strategy. Until then, I ask for your patience and your focus on the work that has always made Summit exceptional." As the crowd dispersed, returning to their desks with a mixture of relief and lingering concern, Marcus approached. "The development team has completed the security audit," he reported, low enough that only Richard and I could hear. "We've identified and removed all the backdoor access points Mercer's people installed. The prototype data is secure." "And James?" I asked. "Still in FBI custody. They found evidence linking him directly to financial transactions with Mercer. He's cooperating fully, apparently." I nodded, unsurprised. James had always chosen the path of least resistance. "Have Gia implement the new security protocols?" "Immediately." "And Marcus? Good work these past 2 days. I won't forget it." As Marcus headed back to the development team, Richard touched my arm lightly. "The board will want answers," he said, his expression grave. "About everything, including my role in this." I studied his face, the face of my business partner, my friend, the man who had nearly lost everything to his own demons and Mercer's manipulation. "Then we'll give them answers. All of them." The Summit Solutions boardroom had always impressed visitors with its panoramic views of the Denver skyline and the distant mountains. Today, those same windows seemed to magnify the tension as 8 board members sat in stony silence, watching Richard and me take our seats at the head of the polished oak table. Howard Chen, our lead investor and board chair, spoke first. "I think it's fair to say this is an extraordinary situation." His measured tone belied the gravity in his eyes. "The FBI has provided a preliminary briefing, but we need to hear directly from both of you exactly what happened and where Summit stands now." I glanced at Richard, giving him the choice to begin. He straightened his shoulders and faced the board squarely. "What happened was my fault," he stated simply. "Personal financial difficulties led me into a vulnerable position that Victor Mercer exploited. He used my debts as leverage to infiltrate Summit, with the ultimate goal of acquiring our technology while destroying the company itself. One by one." Richard detailed his missteps, the gambling losses, the mounting debts, the initial approach from Mercer that had seemed like a lifeline. He explained how Parker had been installed against his better judgment, how the situation had spiraled beyond his control, and how he had finally realized the true scope of Mercer's plan. When he finished, the boardroom remained silent for several painful moments. Howard finally spoke, his voice carrying the weight of his responsibility to Summit's investors. "Your candor is appreciated, Richard. But it doesn't change the fact that your actions and inactions placed this company in extraordinary peril. He turned to me. Emma, from your perspective, where do we stand now? I opened the folder in front of me, distributing copies of the assessment I'd prepared during the drive back from Boulder. The immediate threats have been neutralized, I began. Mercer and Parker are in custody, and the FBI has frozen the assets of New Dawn Ventures. Our intellectual property remains secure, and our banking relationships are intact. However, I continued, meeting each board member's gaze in turn, the damage to our operations is significant. I outlined the disruptions Parker had caused: key projects delayed, team structures fragmented, client relationships strained by sudden leadership changes. Most critically, we've lost the trust of our employees. They've witnessed instability at the highest levels of our company, and rebuilding that confidence will take time and transparent leadership. Catherine Winters, our most recently appointed board member and a veteran of several tech turnarounds, leaned forward. What are you proposing? I took a deep breath. This was the moment that would determine Summit's future, and my own. A complete restructuring of Summit's leadership beginning at the top. Richard and I are equal partners on paper, but in practice, our roles need to evolve. I turned to Richard, offering him both acknowledgement and respect before continuing. I propose that I assume the role of CEO, with direct oversight of all operations and final authority on strategic decisions. Richard nodded, acceptance and relief mingling in his expression. I support this completely. Emma has proven beyond any doubt that her leadership is what Summit needs now. Howard's expression remained carefully neutral. And your role, Richard? I believe I can still provide value in business development and external partnerships, Richard replied. But I recognize that my recent actions require accountability. I'm prepared to step back from operational leadership and work under whatever restrictions the board deems appropriate, including regular financial disclosures and oversight. Several board members exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between them. Howard tapped his pen against the table thoughtfully before addressing the room. This situation has exposed significant vulnerabilities in our governance structure. What assurance do we have that Summit won't face similar threats in the future? I was prepared for this question. I've developed a comprehensive security and governance overhaul. I distributed a second document outlining new checks and balances, enhanced financial controls, security protocols, and leadership accountability measures. Additionally, I continued, I've drafted a revised operating agreement that would require multi-level approval for any significant structural or financial changes to the company. No single person, including me, would have unilateral authority to alter Summit's fundamental direction or integrity. Catherine studied the document carefully before looking up. This is remarkably thorough, given the time frame. I met her gaze steadily. I've had 2 days to consider exactly what went wrong and how to prevent it from happening again. I haven't slept much. A hint of a smile touched her lips. Clearly. Howard gathered the documents into a neat stack. The board will need to deliberate on these proposals, if you would excuse us. Before you deliberate, I interjected, there's one more factor to consider. I retrieved a final folder from my bag. These are Summit's current project commitments and financial projections. Despite everything that's happened, our core business remains sound. The solar cell technology that Mercer was so desperate to acquire is still ours, still revolutionary, and still positioned to transform both our company and the renewable energy sector. I stood, emphasizing my next words with quiet conviction. Summit Solutions isn't just salvageable, it's essential. The work we do matters not just to our bottom line, but to the communities we serve. Whatever leadership structure you approve, that mission cannot be compromised. Richard rose to stand beside me, a united front despite everything. "We built this company to make a difference," he added. "That purpose remains unchanged, regardless of my personal failures." Howard nodded, once a gesture of acknowledgement rather than agreement. "We'll take that into consideration. Please wait outside." The next 40 minutes were among the longest of my life. Richard and I sat in adjacent chairs in the hallway outside the boardroom, neither of us speaking much. What was there to say? The future of Summit, and the technology we'd devoted years to developing, rested in the hands of 8 people weighing cold business calculations against human error and redemption. Finally, the boardroom door opened. Howard gestured for us to re-enter. "The board has reached several decisions," he announced once we were seated. "First, we unanimously accept Emma's appointment as CEO of Summit Solutions, effective immediately, with the expanded authorities outlined in her proposal." Relief washed through me, but I maintained my composed expression. This was just the first hurdle. Second, regarding Richard Grant's continued role with the company. Howard turned to Richard, his expression grave but not unkind. "The board acknowledges your transparency and cooperation with authorities. We also recognize your foundational contributions to Summit. However, your actions created unacceptable risk to this company and its stakeholders." Richard nodded, accepting the implicit rebuke without protest. "You will remain on the board and retain your ownership stake," Howard continued. "However, your operational role will be limited to external partnerships, subject to direct oversight by Emma and quarterly review by this board. Additionally, you will agree to complete financial transparency and the establishment of a trust to manage your Summit shares with appropriate guardrails." It was a compromise, neither full forgiveness nor complete removal. From Richard's expression, it was more than he had expected. "I accept these terms," he said quietly. Howard turned back to me. "Finally, the board endorses your proposed governance reforms with minor modifications to be worked out with legal counsel. We expect implementation within 30 days. He looked between us, his expression softening slightly. Summit Solutions has survived an extraordinary threat, largely due to Emma's quick thinking and Richard's ultimate cooperation. The coming months will be challenging as we rebuild trust with our employees, partners, and investors. But this board believes in the company's mission and its capacity to recover." As the meeting concluded, board members filed out, several pausing to speak quietly with me or shake Richard's hand, small gestures of support that carried significant weight. Catherine Winters lingered, waiting until we were alone before speaking. "That was impressive work," she said, directing her words to me. "Not just the planning, but the execution. Not many people could have done what you did these past 2 days." "I had help," I acknowledged, glancing toward Richard. "Yes," she agreed, her sharp eyes assessing us both. "But leadership is ultimately lonely, especially in crisis. Remember that, CEO Rodriguez." After she left, Richard and I stood in the empty boardroom, the weight of all that had happened and all that still needed to be done settling around us. "I'm sorry, Emma," he said finally, the words seemingly inadequate for the magnitude of his actions. "For everything, for nearly destroying what we built together." I studied him, this flawed, brilliant man who had been my partner through Summit's journey from concept to reality. The anger I'd felt toward him hadn't disappeared, but it had transformed into something more complex, more nuanced. "I know," I replied simply. There would be time for longer conversations, for rebuilding the trust between us as we rebuilt Summit itself. But now wasn't that time. I gathered my papers and moved toward the door. "We should address the staff together. They need to see a unified leadership team, even if the dynamics have changed." Richard nodded, falling into step beside me. "What do we tell them?" I paused, considering the hundreds of employees whose livelihoods and professional purpose were tied to Summit's success. They deserved more than corporate platitudes or vague reassurances. We tell them the truth, I decided. That we faced a crisis, we survived it, and we've emerged with clearer purpose and stronger governance. That the work they do still matters, perhaps now more than ever. And that Summit Solutions continues, not just as a company, but as a commitment to the vision we've always shared. As we stepped into the elevator, Richard surprised me with a question. Do you regret it? Partnering with me all those years ago? I watched the floor numbers descend, considering his question carefully. The easy answer would be no, a reflexive reassurance. But our relationship, personal and professional, had evolved beyond easy answers. I regret that things reached this point, I said finally. I regret that you didn't trust me enough to share your struggles before Mercer exploited them. But partnering with you? I shook my head. No. Summit wouldn't exist without both of us. And despite everything, I still believe in what we built. The elevator doors opened to the main floor where our employees waited, gathered in the central atrium per Sophia's arrangements. Hundreds of faces turned toward us, expressions ranging from concern to curiosity to cautious hope. Richard straightened his shoulders, the familiar public persona settling over him like a well-worn coat. But before he could step forward, I placed a hand lightly on his arm. Let me take the lead on this, I said quietly. We're starting a new chapter. He hesitated only briefly before nodding, accepting this visible shift in our dynamic. Of course, CEO Rodriguez. As I stepped forward to address the company, my company now more than ever, I felt a clarity I hadn't experienced since before Nathan Parker had walked into that break room and changed everything. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. Trust, once broken, requires patient reconstruction. But Summit Solutions had survived its darkest moment, and I had discovered strengths I never knew I possessed. The new manager had fired me without knowing I was the co-owner of the company. He'd never get the chance to make the same mistake again, nor would anyone else. From this day forward, Summit moved ahead under my leadership, shaped by hard lessons, but strengthened by overcoming them. I took a deep breath and began to speak. 2 days ago, many of you watched as I was escorted from this building after being told my contributions were non-essential. Today, I stand before you as CEO. Ripple of reaction moved through the crowd, surprised murmurs, a few scattered claps. What happened in between those two moments is a story of corporate intrigue, attempted theft, and ultimately, the resilience of what we've built together. It's a story I intend to share with you fully and transparently, because moving forward, this company operates on a foundation of complete honesty, even when that honesty is uncomfortable. I gestured to Richard, acknowledging his presence without diminishing my authority. Richard and I founded Summit Solutions with a vision of making renewable energy accessible to all communities. That vision remains unchanged. How we pursue it, however, will evolve based on what we've learned. As I continued outlining the changes ahead, the restructured leadership, the enhanced security, the recommitment to our core projects, I watched hope gradually replace uncertainty in the eyes of our team. They had witnessed a leadership crisis and survived it. Now they were part of rebuilding something stronger. In that moment, facing the company I had helped create and had nearly lost, I realized that Nathan Parker had done me an unexpected favor. By firing me, he had forced me to fight not just for my position, but for my purpose. The woman who stood before these employees now wasn't just a co-owner who had reclaimed her rightful place. She was a leader who had discovered her true power. And Summit Solutions would be better for it. 3 weeks after Mercer's arrest, I found myself standing at the podium in Summit's largest conference room, facing not just our employees, but representatives from every major tech and energy publication in the country. The room hummed with anticipation, notebooks and recording devices at the ready. This wasn't just a routine press conference. This was Summit Solutions' official rebirth. I adjusted the microphone slightly, surveying the packed room. My navy suit was crisp, my voice steady as I began. Thank you all for coming today. 2 months ago, Summit Solutions faced what could have been an extinction-level threat. A coordinated corporate espionage operation nearly stripped us of our technology, our financial resources, and our future. Today, I'm pleased to announce not just our survival, but our transformation. The presentation screen behind me illuminated. With our new corporate structure, sleeker, more transparent, with clear lines of accountability flowing through each department. The restructuring had been exhaustive, touching every level of the organization. Summit Solutions 2.0, as we've been calling it internally, represents more than just a response to crisis. It embodies the lessons we've learned about resilience, governance, and remaining true to our founding mission, even as we adapt to new challenges. Behind the polished corporate language lay 3 weeks of grueling work. I had barely left the office, spending days rebuilding department structures, nights reviewing security protocols, and every moment in between reassuring nervous investors that Summit's future remained bright. Sleep had become a luxury I couldn't afford. Our core technology, the high-efficiency solar cells that were the target of the attempted theft, remains secure and on track for full production deployment. Today, I'm announcing an accelerated timeline that will bring this technology to market 6 months ahead of our previous schedule. This announcement generated the expected murmur among the press. 6 months was an eternity in renewable energy development, a field where progress typically crawled forward in incremental improvements measured in single-digit percentages. What I didn't share was the personal cost of this acceleration. Development teams working around the clock, manufacturing partnerships renegotiated under intense pressure, and my own relentless push to prove that Summit was stronger than ever. As I continued outlining our recovery strategy, I caught Richard's eye from his position at the side of the room. He gave me a small nod of encouragement. Our new dynamic remained a work in progress, him stepping back from operational leadership while retaining his ownership stake, me assuming full control as CEO with expanded authority. The arrangement was still finding its equilibrium, but we were both committed to making it work. In addition to our technology roadmap, Summit is announcing a new corporate governance structure designed to protect against future threats while enhancing transparency for our partners and investors. I detailed the enhanced security protocols, the restructured board oversight, and the new ethics committee that would monitor compliance at every level. These weren't just defensive measures. They represented a fundamental shift in how Summit operated, an evolution from scrappy startup to mature industry leader. Finally, I'm proud to announce the Summit Community Energy Initiative, a $10 million commitment to bringing our solar technology to underserved communities across the Southwest. This program remains central to our mission and our identity as a company. I paused, emphasizing the next words. Some might view community projects as secondary to commercial success. At Summit, we see them as essential to our purpose and our future. This last point was my direct response to Mercer's dismissal of our community work as feel-good projects without real value. The initiative represented everything Mercer had tried to eliminate, and everything I was determined to preserve as Summit's new leader. As the formal presentation concluded and the Q&A began, the questions came rapid fire from the assembled journalists. Ms. Rodriguez, how do you respond to speculation that Summit's financial position remains vulnerable despite today's announcements? I smiled, prepared for this line of attack. Our latest quarterly financials have been provided in your press packets. You'll note that our cash position has strengthened by 22% compared to pre-crisis levels, and our order book for the next 18 months is fully subscribed. Those aren't the metrics of a vulnerable company. Another reporter jumped in. Sources suggest that Nathan Parker's brief tenure resulted in the departure of several key engineers. Has this affected your technology timeline? It's true that we lost talent during that turbulent period, I acknowledged, seeing no benefit in denying the obvious. However, in the past 3 weeks, we've not only rehired many of those individuals, but recruited additional expertise from across the industry. Our development team is now larger and more specialized than before this crisis began. What I didn't mention was the personal calls I'd made to each departed employee, the promises of better compensation and greater autonomy, the late-night conversations convincing them to return to a company that had once pushed them out. Some had required little persuasion. They'd witnessed the chaos from afar and were eager to rejoin a stabilized Summit. Others had needed more convincing, their trust damaged by the experience of being deemed expendable during Parker's brief reign. The questions continued, each one probing for weaknesses in our recovery strategy or lingering vulnerabilities from the crisis. I fielded them with the practiced ease of someone who had anticipated every possible angle of attack. By the time the last question was answered, the narrative had clearly shifted, from Summit as victim to Summit as resilient survivor. As the press filed out, Marcus approached, satisfaction evident in his expression. "You nailed it," he said quietly. "The market's already responding. Our stock is up 12% since you started speaking." I nodded, allowing myself a moment of quiet satisfaction. The press conference had been just one battle in the larger campaign to restore Summit's reputation, but it was a crucial victory. "The hard part starts now," I reminded him, delivering on everything we just promised. He grinned. "Since when has that ever stopped you?" The following days blurred together in a whirlwind of implementation meetings, investor calls, and strategy sessions. The Summit that was emerging from crisis bore my distinct imprint, more agile, more transparent, but also more ambitious than ever before. Every decision I made carried the weight of proving that the company's near-death experience had made us stronger rather than weakened us. On Thursday evening, a week after the press conference, I was still at my desk reviewing manufacturing contracts when Sophia knocked on my office door. "Got a minute?" she asked, her expression suggesting this wasn't a casual check-in. I gestured to the chair across from me. "What's up?" She closed the door before sitting down, a sure sign that whatever she had to discuss was sensitive. "The FBI concluded their forensic analysis of Parker's communications. They found something you should see." She placed a folder on my desk, actual paper, not digital, another indication of the material's sensitivity. "Parker kept detailed notes on everyone at Summit," she explained as I opened the folder. "Personality assessments, potential vulnerabilities, leverage points. Mercer had him collecting intelligence on the entire leadership team months before he was officially hired." I flipped through the pages, a chill running through me as I saw my colleagues reduced to clinical evaluations of their usefulness or potential threat level. Then I reached the section on me and my blood ran cold. Parker's assessment was brutally comprehensive. He had mapped my entire professional history, my relationships within the company, my decision-making patterns during previous crises. He had identified my perceived weaknesses: excessive loyalty to community projects at the expense of profit margins, and reluctance to sacrifice personnel during resource constraints. Most disturbing was his strategy for neutralizing me. Remove without warning to maximize psychological impact and prevent organized resistance. Rodriguez will likely attempt to challenge dismissal through formal channels rather than immediate confrontation. He had predicted my reactions with unsettling accuracy. If not for Richard's disappearance triggering my suspicions, Parker's strategy might have succeeded. He had understood exactly how to exploit Summit's weaknesses and my own tendencies. "There's more," Sophia said quietly. "Check the last page." I turned to find a handwritten note that had been attached to my file. Parker's neat, precise handwriting read, "Final recommendation. Termination of Rodriguez presents significant risk due to her deep knowledge of proprietary technology and client relationships." Mercer insists on immediate removal, despite my recommendation, for gradual marginalization. This deviation from established protocol may compromise entire operation. He knew, I said, looking up at Sophia. He knew firing me was a mistake, and he did it anyway. Because Mercer pushed for it, she confirmed. The FBI found communications suggesting Mercer was impatient with Parker's methodical approach. He wanted quick results. I leaned back in my chair, processing this new information. Their arrogance was their downfall, I said finally. If they had followed Parker's original plan, gradually reducing my influence, isolating me from key decisions, they might have succeeded. There's a lesson there, Sophia observed. Several, I agreed, closing the folder. Never underestimate your opponents. Never rush a complex operation. And never, ever fire someone without knowing exactly who they are first. Later that night, I sat in my downtown loft, the lights of Denver spreading below my windows like a constellation. Parker's file lay open on my coffee table, a reminder of how close Summit had come to destruction, and how narrowly I had avoided professional exile. My phone buzzed with a text from Richard. Board unanimously approved the new security protocols. Full speed ahead. Another small victory in our ongoing recovery. I texted back a brief acknowledgement, then set my phone aside, returning to my contemplation of the city and everything that had transpired in the past month. The doorbell interrupted my thoughts. It was nearly 11, far too late for casual visitors. I approached cautiously, checking the security camera I'd had installed after Mercer's. Arrest had made me acutely aware of potential retaliation. To my surprise, Catherine Winters stood in my hallway. I opened the door, curiosity overcoming my initial caution. Catherine, this is unexpected. The board member offered a small smile. I was in a late meeting nearby and saw your lights were still on. She gestured to the folder visible on my coffee table. Working from home? Something like that, I replied, stepping aside to let her enter. Can I offer you a drink? I'd kill for a decent scotch if you have it. I poured us each 2 fingers of Oban, one of the few luxuries I allowed myself, and we settled in my living room. Catherine took a moment to appreciate the view before turning her attention back to me. The board is impressed with your handling of the recovery, she said, getting straight to the point. The press response has been overwhelmingly positive. The stock is rebounding and employee retention has stabilized. But, I prompted, sensing there was more to this late visit than delivering compliments. She smiled, appreciating my directness. But we're concerned about sustainability, yours specifically. You've been working around the clock for weeks. The question isn't whether you can save Summit. You've already done that. It's whether you'll burn yourself out in the process. I hadn't expected this particular concern. I'm fine, I replied automatically. The situation demands intensive oversight right now. Catherine took a sip of her scotch, studying me over the rim of her glass. Emma, I've led 3 companies through major transitions. I recognize the signs of executive overreach when I see them. You're trying to personally manage every aspect of Summit's recovery, and it's not sustainable. Her observation hit uncomfortably close to the truth. Since taking control, I had inserted myself into virtually every significant decision across the company, from engineering specifications to marketing language to HR policies. My calendar was booked with back-to-back meetings from 7 in the morning until well into the evening, 7 days a week. There's too much at stake to delegate right now, I said, trying to mask my defensiveness. That's exactly backward, Catherine countered gently. There's too much at stake not to delegate. Summit nearly collapsed because power was too concentrated at the top. Richard made mistakes because there weren't enough checks in the system. Are you repeating that pattern, just with yourself at the center instead? The question struck me, like a physical blow. Was I recreating the very vulnerability I had sought to eliminate in our new governance structure? The thought was deeply unsettling. "I'm not Richard," I said finally. "My judgment isn't compromised by personal issues." "Not yet," Catherine agreed. "But even the best judgment fails under enough strain. The strongest leaders know when to hold tight and when to create space for others to step up." She set her glass down and leaned forward, her expression softening. "Emma, what you've accomplished these past weeks is remarkable. You saved Summit when many would have walked away. You've earned the right to lead this company for as long as you choose. But if you want your leadership to be sustainable, and I believe you do, you need to build a team you trust completely, then give them room to excel." After Catherine left, her words stayed with me, prompting a painful self-examination. Had I been consolidating power rather than distributing it? Had my determination to prove Summit could survive morphed into a need to control every aspect of its recovery? The evidence was difficult to ignore. My calendar was impossibly overloaded. My executive team was waiting for my guidance on decisions they were perfectly capable of making themselves. I had created bottlenecks where none needed to exist. The realization was humbling. In my drive to save Summit, I had started to become what I most despised in leaders, someone who couldn't trust others to share the burden. The next morning, I arrived at the office earlier than usual, determined to begin correcting course. I started by canceling half of my meetings for the day, then called my executive team together for an unscheduled session. They filed into the conference room looking varying degrees of curious and concerned. Unscheduled meetings had become associated with crisis over the past month. "Thank you all for making time," I began once everyone was seated. "I'll get straight to the point. I've been micromanaging this company, and that ends today." Their surprise was evident, though no one contradicted me. I continued. "Summit's recovery doesn't depend on me personally overseeing every decision. It depends on each of you having the authority and resources to excel in your areas of expertise." I distributed a document outlining a revised organizational structure, one that pushed significant decision-making authority down to the department level, with clear accountability measures but reduced direct oversight from me. "This takes effect immediately," I explained. "You'll have more autonomy, more responsibility, and more direct access to resources. In return, I expect transparent communication, proactive problem-solving, and results that align with our strategic priorities." Marcus was the first to respond, studying the document thoughtfully. "This is a major shift. What prompted it?" I appreciated his directness. "The realization that I was becoming the bottleneck rather than the solution. Summit is too important, our mission too vital, to be limited by my capacity as an individual." Gia, our head of cybersecurity, looked up from the document with a small smile. "Does this mean you'll stop attending our daily security briefings?" "It does," I confirmed. "You'll send me the highlights, escalate critical issues, and otherwise handle security as you see fit within the approved framework?" The relief in the room was palpable, not because they didn't value my input, but because they had been constrained by waiting for it on matters they were perfectly capable of handling. Over the following days, I systematically dismantled the centralized control structure I had unconsciously created during the crisis. Each decision to step back was difficult, each delegation a small exercise in trust. But gradually, I felt the organization begin to breathe again, to function not as an extension of my will but as an ecosystem of talented professionals united by a common purpose. The true test came unexpectedly, 3 days after implementing the new structure. I was in a rare moment of solitude in my office when an alert flashed across my screen, a potential security breach in our development server. My instinct was to immediately call Gia, demand details, and direct the response. Instead, I watched as the incident management protocol unfolded without my intervention. Gia's team isolated the affected system, implemented the containment procedures we had established, and began forensic analysis. all without waiting for my approval or guidance. 2 hours later, Gia appeared at my door with a comprehensive report. The breach had been a false positive triggered by an authorized but unusual access pattern. More importantly, her team had handled it flawlessly, demonstrating that Summit's security didn't depend on my personal oversight. "You didn't call," Gia observed, a question in her tone. "I didn't need to," I replied simply. "You had it under control." She smiled, understanding the significance of that trust. "We did." As Summit settled into this new operational rhythm, I found myself with something I hadn't experienced since before Nathan Parker walked into our offices: space, to think strategically rather than just react tactically. The perspective gained from this distance proved invaluable, allowing me to see patterns and possibilities that had been obscured in the daily crush of crisis management. It was during one of these moments of clarity that I realized our response to Mercer's attack could become more than just a recovery strategy. It could be transformed into a competitive advantage. I called Richard to share my insight, our professional relationship gradually finding its new balance. Despite the events that had nearly destroyed Summit, his strategic mind remained one of our greatest assets. The security protocols we developed after Mercer's attack, I explained when he arrived at my office. They're not just defensive measures, they're a potential product line. Richard raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Go on." "Every company in our sector fears what happened to us. Corporate espionage, intellectual property theft, insider threats. We've built a comprehensive security framework out of necessity. What if we package that expertise as a consulting service for other renewable energy firms?" He considered the idea, the familiar spark of entrepreneurial excitement lighting his eyes. "Turning our worst experience into a business opportunity," he mused. "It's elegant, but would other companies trust us after what happened?" "They'll trust us precisely because of what happened," I countered. "We're not selling theory. We're selling battle-tested solutions developed under real-world conditions. Who better to help secure a clean energy company than people who survived an actual attack?" The concept quickly evolved from interesting idea to concrete initiative. Within weeks, we had established Summit Security Solutions, a specialized consulting division offering the expertise we had developed at such great cost. The response from the industry exceeded even my optimistic projections, with 3 major contracts signed within the first month. By turning our crisis response into a marketable service, we had created something Mercer and Parker could never have anticipated: a completely new revenue stream born directly from their attempt to destroy us. 6 months after Nathan Parker had called me non-essential and shown me the door, Summit Solutions hosted its annual Innovation Showcase. The event had always been significant in the renewable energy calendar, but this year carried special weight. It would be the first public demonstration of our advanced solar cell technology, the very innovation Mercer had tried to steal. The Denver Convention Center hummed with activity as industry leaders, investors, and media gathered to witness what Summit had been protecting so fiercely. I moved through the crowd, pausing for conversations with key partners and potential clients, acutely aware of how different this felt from previous years. Before, I had been the brilliant engineer behind Summit's technology, respected for my technical expertise, but often overshadowed by Richard's more flamboyant business presence. Now, I was recognized as the CEO who had not only created breakthrough technology but saved the company when it faced extinction. The shift in how people approached me was subtle but unmistakable: a new level of deference, a deeper respect. As the lights dimmed for the main presentation, I took my place at center stage. The audience quieted, anticipation filling the hall. 6 months ago, I began. Summit Solutions faced an existential threat. A coordinated attack nearly separated us from the technology we had spent years developing. Today, we don't just stand here having survived that attack. We stand transformed by it. I gestured to the sleek panel displayed beside me. This solar collection system represents more than just an incremental improvement in energy efficiency. It embodies a philosophy that has guided Summit since our founding, that renewable energy can and must become accessible to everyone, regardless of economic status or geographic location. For the next 30 minutes, I detailed the technical specifications that made our solar cells revolutionary, the advanced materials, the novel manufacturing process, the unprecedented efficiency rates. But more than the technical achievements, I emphasized what this technology meant for communities that had been left behind in the clean energy transition. When fully deployed, these systems will reduce installation costs by 35% while increasing energy capture by 40%. That isn't just a market advantage, it's the difference between renewable energy as a luxury and renewable energy as a universal resource. The audience response was everything we had hoped for: sustained applause, immediate press coverage, and a flood of partnership inquiries. But the most satisfying moment came after the formal presentation, when a young engineer from a community solar nonprofit approached me. "Ms. Rodriguez," she said, her expression earnest, "your technology could transform our projects in rural New Mexico. We've been struggling with efficiency losses at the elevations we work with." "Send me the specifications of your current installations," I replied. "I think we can help." As she walked away, visibly excited, Richard joined me, champagne flutes in hand. "To Summit's triumphant return," he said, offering me a glass. I accepted it with a small smile. "To lessons learned the hard way." We clinked glasses, our complicated history acknowledged but not dwelled upon. Summit's path forward was clearer than ever, not despite the crisis we had weathered, but because of it. Later that evening, as the event wound down, I found myself standing alone for a moment, watching the dispersing crowd from a quiet corner. The showcase had exceeded all expectations, cementing Summit's position as an industry leader and validating the difficult decisions of the past 6 months. Marcus joined me, satisfaction evident in his relaxed posture. "Quite a difference from 6 months ago," he observed. "Night and day," I agreed. "I keep thinking about Parker," he said, the look on his face when he realized who you really were. "Do you think he ever understood just how badly he miscalculated?" I considered the question. Nathan Parker's trial was still months away, but the preliminary hearings had revealed a man who seemed genuinely shocked by how thoroughly his plans had unraveled. "I think he understood the professional miscalculation," I replied, "but I doubt he grasped the deeper mistake." Which was? Assuming that title equals value. I gestured toward the exhibition floor where our team was still engaged with potential partners. He saw me as replaceable because I wasn't called CEO or founder on a business card. He never bothered to learn who actually built the technology he was trying to steal. Marcus nodded thoughtfully. His loss, our gain? Exactly. As we prepared to leave, I took one final look at the Summit logo prominently displayed above the exhibition. The company I had helped build had nearly been stolen from me through arrogance and deception. Instead, that attempt had led to me stepping fully into my power as its leader. Nathan Parker had fired me without knowing I was the co-owner of the company. His mistake had transformed not just my role at Summit, but my understanding of my own capabilities. In trying to remove me, he had inadvertently created a stronger, more determined version of the woman he had so casually dismissed. I smiled at the irony. Sometimes being underestimated is the greatest advantage of all. The car service was waiting outside the convention center, ready to take me back to my apartment. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, partnership agreements to finalize, production schedules to review, strategic decisions to make with my leadership team. But tonight, I allowed myself to savor the victory that had seemed so impossible 6 months ago. Summit Solutions wasn't just surviving, it was thriving. And I wasn't just its co-owner anymore. I was its undisputed leader, strengthened by fire, tested by crisis, and more certain than ever of my purpose at its helm. As the car pulled away from the curb, I turned my gaze toward the future, not just Summit's, but my own. The journey that had begun with a dismissive firing had led to a profound transformation. Whatever challenges lay ahead, I would face them not just as the woman who owned the company, but as the leader who had saved it when everyone else thought it was lost. Nathan Parker had made a catastrophic error in judgment, and I would spend the rest of my career ensuring that no one ever made the same mistake again. 1 year to the day after Nathan Parker had dismissed me from my own company, I stood on the rooftop of Summit's headquarters, watching as the final panel of our demonstration array was locked into place. The installation team stepped back, giving me a clear view of what we'd accomplished, a gleaming testament to resilience shimmering in the Colorado sunlight. "Ready when you are, Emma," Marcus called from the monitoring station. With a nod, I pressed the activation button. The system hummed to life, power indicators flashing green across the board as our revolutionary solar technology began converting sunlight into energy at record efficiency. Applause erupted from the gathered employees and investors. "Peak output, exceeding projections by 7%, Gia announced, reading from the monitoring screens. "That's better than lab conditions." I smiled, satisfaction warming me more than the autumn sun. "Send the data to the community project teams. They'll want to adjust their implementation plans." The past year had transformed Summit Solutions. What began as a desperate fight for survival had evolved into the most productive period in our company's history. Our market valuation had tripled. Our workforce had doubled. Most importantly, our technology was now powering schools, hospitals, and homes in communities traditionally left behind by the clean energy revolution. As the demonstration concluded and people filtered back inside for the reception, Richard lingered behind, waiting until we were alone before speaking. "1 year," he said, looking out over the Denver skyline. "Hard to believe." "Some days it feels like a decade," I replied. "Others like it just happened." He nodded, understanding exactly what I meant. The crisis had aged us both, leaving visible marks, more silver in his hair, faint lines around my eyes that hadn't been there before. But we had weathered it together, rebuilding not just Summit, but our partnership, albeit on very different terms than before. "The board's quarterly review came in this morning," he said. "Unanimous praise for your leadership. Howard specifically mentioned that promoting you to CEO was the best decision they've ever made." I laughed softly. "A decision they were forced into by extraordinary circumstances." "Sometimes the best choices are the ones we're pushed to make," he observed. "Speaking of which, have you thought about Parker's parole hearing next month?" My mood sobered. Nathan Parker had accepted a plea deal, serving just 1 year for his role in the corporate espionage scheme. Victor Mercer, who had orchestrated the entire operation, faced a much longer sentence, but Parker had cooperated extensively, reducing his time. "I'm not opposing it," I said after a moment. "Keeping him in prison doesn't benefit Summit." Richard raised an eyebrow. "That's surprisingly magnanimous." "It's practical," I corrected him. "Parker's career in corporate leadership is over. His professional reputation is destroyed. The truth is, he's irrelevant to Summit's future." As we made our way downstairs to join the reception, I reflected on how completely my perspective had changed. A year ago, Parker's dismissal had seemed like the end of my professional world. Now, it barely registered as a footnote in Summit's story, or my own. The reception was in full swing when we arrived. The atrium transformed into an elegant showcase of Summit's achievements. Our latest community project was featured prominently, a partnership with tribal nations to bring renewable energy to remote reservations across the Southwest. Catherine Winters intercepted me near the display, champagne in hand. "Quite a transformation from when we met," she observed. "Both the company and its CEO." "We've come a long way," I acknowledged. "And where does Summit go from here?" she asked. You've stabilized the company, accelerated the technology, expanded the mission. What's next? It was a question I'd been considering extensively. Success had brought new possibilities, and with them, new decisions about Summit's path forward. We go beyond solar, I replied. The efficiency breakthroughs we've achieved can be applied to other renewable technologies. Summit was always meant to be more than just one innovation. Catherine nodded approvingly. Ambitious. The board will support it. As the evening progressed, I circulated through the crowd, connecting with investors, congratulating team members, discussing technical details with engineering partners. In every conversation, I felt the quiet confidence that comes not from position or title, but from having been tested and proven equal to the challenge. Near the end of the reception, I slipped away for a moment of solitude in my office. The space had evolved with me over the past year, less cluttered, more intentional, with large windows showcasing the city Summit was helping to power. On my desk sat a simple framed photo, the original Summit Solutions team, 5 people standing, in front of an empty warehouse that would become our first real office. Richard and I in the center, so young, so unaware of the challenges ahead, but absolutely certain of our mission. I picked up the frame, studying our younger selves with a mixture of nostalgia and appreciation for how far we'd come. Parker had never understood what made Summit special. He had seen positions on an organizational chart, not the passion and purpose that truly drove the company forward. His greatest mistake wasn't firing someone without checking their ownership stake. It was failing to recognize that titles don't determine value. The scientist he so casually dismissed as non-essential had built the technology, the client relationships, and ultimately, the resilience that saved the company. A soft knock at the door pulled me from my thoughts. Marcus stood in the doorway, holding a small package. "Sorry to interrupt," he said, "but this just arrived for you." I opened the package to find a business card and a brief handwritten note. "Heard about your expansion plans. When you're ready to discuss international markets, I'd welcome the conversation. NP." Nathan Parker's new consulting firm logo was emblazoned on the card. I laughed, dropping both items into the recycling bin. Some people never learn. Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Problem?" "Not at all," I replied, turning back toward the reception and the future that awaited. Just someone who still doesn't understand who I really am. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.